The morning rush. Victoria Hayes wiped down the espresso machine for the third time that morning, watching the steam rise like tiny clouds of hope into the warm air of Moonbeam Cafe. A small downtown coffee shop buzzed with its usual collection of office workers grabbing their caffeine fix before diving into another day of corporate battles. At 24, Victoria had grown accustomed to the rhythm of grinding beans, steaming milk, and serving smiles alongside lattes, two strangers who barely looked up from their phones. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun, secured with a pencil she had been sketching with during her break. Art had always been her true passion, but rent in downtown Seattle demanded more practical pursuits. The cafe job paid just enough to keep her tiny studio apartment and buy art supplies, though both were often stretched thin by month's end. Victoria. Table 6 needs another cappuccino, called Rosa, her best friend and fellow barista from behind the register. Rosa had been Victoria's roommate since college, and the only person who still believed Victoria's art would someday pay the bills instead of decorating their refrigerator with rejection letters from galleries. Victoria nodded and began working the espresso machine, her movements automatic after 2 years of morning shifts. The familiar sounds of grinding, steaming, and casual conversation created a soundtrack she could navigate with her eyes closed. Outside the large windows, Seattle's morning mist clung to the buildings like a soft gray blanket, promising another day of that gentle melancholy the city was famous for. The desperate stranger. The door burst open with such force that the small bell above it seemed to cry out in alarm. Victoria looked up to see a man in an expensive charcoal suit stumbling inside, his dark hair slightly disheveled, and his usually perfect appearance showing cracks of desperation. Gabriel Sterling looked like he had stepped out of a business magazine, all sharp angles and polished edges. But something in his green eyes spoke of barely controlled panic. He scanned the cafe quickly, his gaze settling on Victoria behind the counter. Without hesitation, he strode toward her, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the worn wooden floors with purpose and urgency. "Please," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that Victoria could not quite place. "I need to use a phone. Mine is completely dead, and I have a call that cannot wait." His hands gestured as he spoke, revealing an expensive watch that probably cost more than Victoria made in 6 months. Victoria hesitated, her instincts warring between caution and compassion. She had seen enough movies to know that lending your phone to strangers in expensive suits was usually the beginning of either a romantic comedy or a thriller, and she was not entirely sure which genre her life was currently occupying. "What kind of call?" she asked, studying his face for signs of deception. His features were striking, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to hold depths of experience beyond his apparent age. There was something magnetic about his presence, even in his current state of controlled chaos. "A business call that will determine whether I lose $20 million in the next 10 minutes, Gabriel replied, his honesty as surprising as his directness. "I understand your hesitation. A stranger asking to borrow your phone seems suspicious, but I promise you, this is legitimate. The phone call that changed everything something." In his tone convinced Victoria to pull her phone from her apron pocket. She handed it to him, noting how his hands shook slightly as he took it. For all his expensive clothing and confident demeanor, he seemed genuinely terrified of whatever call he needed to make. Gabriel dialed quickly, his fingers moving with the precision of someone who had made this call 1,000 times in his mind. As soon as the other party answered, his entire demeanor transformed. The nervous energy crystallized into focused intensity. And Victoria found herself witnessing what she could only describe as a master at work. "Tanaka-san," Gabriel said, his voice now completely steady and professional. "I apologize for the delay. Yes, the contract modifications are acceptable." He switched effortlessly between English and what sounded like Japanese, his tone adjusting with each language as if he became a different person for each conversation. Victoria watched, fascinated, as he paced the small area in front of the counter, gesturing with his free hand while speaking. Other customers glanced over curiously, but Gabriel seemed oblivious to their attention, Completely absorbed in his conversation, the transfer will be completed within the hour, he continued, now speaking to what sounded like a different person entirely. James ensured the London office receives the documentation immediately. Yes, I understand the time difference. The entire conversation lasted perhaps 7 minutes. But Victoria felt as though she had watched someone conduct a symphony orchestra. When Gabriel finally hung up and handed her phone back, his shoulders sagged slightly with relief, and a genuine smile replaced the mask of professional composure. The unexpected proposition? Thank you, Gabriel said, and Victoria noticed that his accent became more pronounced when he was not speaking in business mode. You have quite literally saved my company from a very expensive mistake. Your company? Victoria asked, suddenly curious about the stranger who had burst into her quiet morning routine like a whirlwind in a whirlwind in a whirlwind, then paused as if expecting recognition. When Victoria's expression remained politely blank, he seemed almost relieved. We develop software solutions for international businesses. The call you just enabled saved a partnership that took 2 years to negotiate. Victoria nodded, not entirely sure what else to say. She had helped a stranger make a phone call which felt far too ordinary to have saved anything worth $20 million. The gap between his world and hers seemed as vast as the distance between Earth and the stars her father used to point out during their camping trips when she was young. I owe you a debt. Gabriel continued, his green eyes studying her face with an intensity that made Victoria suddenly self-conscious about her coffee-stained apron and escaped wisps of hair. What is your name? Victoria Hayes, as she replied, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. And you do not owe me anything. It was just a phone call. Gabriel shook his head slowly, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Nothing is ever just anything. Victoria Hayes. Every action creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see in the moment. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, placing it gently on the counter between them. The card was thick, expensive paper with embossed lettering that seemed to shimmer slightly in the cafe's warm lighting. I have a proposition for you, Gabriel said, his voice taking on a quality that made Victoria feel as though the entire cafe had suddenly become quieter, as if the universe itself were leaning in to listen. I need someone I can trust. Someone who acts from genuine kindness rather than calculated advantage. Victoria picked up the card, noting how solid it felt between her fingers. Gabriel Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, Sterling Innovations. Below his name was a phone number and an address in one of Seattle's most exclusive neighborhoods. What kind of proposition? She asked, though something in her chest was already beating faster with a mixture of excitement and fear. The moment of decision, Gabriel leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret that could change the world. I travel constantly for business. I need someone who can help me navigate not just schedules and logistics, but who can help me remember what it feels like to be human in a world that often rewards us for being machines. The offer hung in the air between them like morning mist, beautiful and ephemeral and slightly dangerous. Victoria could feel Rosa watching from behind the register, and she was aware of the familiar sounds of the cafe continuing around them. But everything seemed to exist at a distance, as if she and Gabriel were enclosed in a bubble of possibility. You do not know anything about me, Victoria said, though her fingers continued to hold his business card as if it were something precious. I know that when a stranger asks for help, you helped without asking what you would gain from it, Gabriel replied. I know that you work in a coffee shop, but you have paint under your fingernails, which suggests you create things when you are not serving caffeine to people who probably do not deserve your kindness. Victoria glanced down at her hands, surprised that he had noticed such a small detail. She did indeed have traces of blue paint beneath her nails from the painting she had worked on late the previous night, a seascape that would probably never be displayed anywhere more prestigious than her refrigerator door. What would this job involve exactly? She asked, though part of her was already imagining possibilities that seemed too large and bright for her small, safe world. Gabriel smiled, and Victoria noticed that when he truly smiled, his entire face transformed, becoming warmer and more approachable than his business persona suggested. Travel, adventure, and the chance to see parts of the world that most people only dream about, he said. Also, helping me remember why any of it matters. The cafe door chimed as another customer entered. Breaking the spell of their conversation, Victoria became aware again of the espresso machine hissing, of Rosa taking orders, of the normal world continuing its rotation around this moment that felt anything but normal. "I cannot just leave my job," Victoria said, though even as she spoke the words, she was imagining what it would feel like to say yes to something completely unknown and potentially wonderful. "Of course not," Gabriel agreed. "But perhaps you could consider the possibility that sometimes the universe puts exactly the right person in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. And the only question is whether we are brave enough to recognize when that happens." He stepped back from the counter, giving her space to breathe and think, but his eyes never left her face. Victoria felt as though she were standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at waters that might be shallow enough to wade through or deep enough to dive into completely. "Think about it, Victoria Hayes," Gabriel said, turning toward the door. "But do not think too long. The best opportunities often have the shortest windows." As he reached the door, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. "And Victoria, thank you again for the phone call. You have given me more than you know." With that, Gabriel Sterling walked out of Moonbeam Cafe and into the Seattle morning, leaving Victoria holding his business card and feeling as though her entire world had just shifted on its axis without anyone asking her permission. The leap of faith. 3 days had passed since Gabriel Sterling had walked out of Moonbeam Cafe, and Victoria had spent every quiet moment staring at his business card. She had tucked it into her apron pocket, pulled it out during breaks, and even placed it on her nightstand where it caught the morning light streaming through her small apartment window. Rosa had grown tired of discussing the mysterious encounter, but Victoria could not shake the feeling that her life was balanced on the edge of something extraordinary. On Thursday morning, as Victoria prepared for another shift at the cafe, her phone rang. The number on the screen matched the one embossed on Gabriel's card, and her heart immediately began beating faster, as if her body recognized the sound of opportunity calling. "Victoria Hayes," she answered, trying to sound more professional than she felt. "Good morning, Victoria." Gabriel's voice came through clearly, carrying that same subtle accent and confidence that had captivated her attention 3 days earlier. "I hope I am not calling too early." Victoria glanced at the clock on her kitchen wall, noting that it was barely 7 in the morning. "Not too early," she replied, though she wondered if people in Gabriel's world considered this a normal time for business calls. "I have a flight to New York leaving this afternoon." Gabriel continued without preamble. "I would like you to come with me. Consider it a trial run for the position we discussed." The directness of his invitation took Victoria's breath away. She had expected more conversation, perhaps a formal interview. Certainly more time to prepare herself mentally for such a dramatic change. "Today?" she managed to ask. "Today," Gabriel confirmed. "I know it seems sudden, but in my experience, the best decisions are often made quickly. Before we have time to talk ourselves out of taking risks that could change our lives." Victoria looked around her tiny apartment, taking in the familiar surroundings that had defined her world for the past 2 years. Her easel stood in the corner with a half-finished painting. Her coffee-stained uniform hung on the back of a chair, and through the window she could see the Seattle skyline shrouded in its typical morning mist. "What would I need to bring?" she heard herself asking, and realized that some part of her had already made the decision. The first taste of luxury for hours later. Victoria found herself sitting in the first-class section of a commercial airliner, watching clouds drift past the window while sipping champagne that probably cost more than her weekly salary. Gabriel sat across from her, working on his laptop with the focused intensity she had witnessed during his phone call at the cafe. But occasionally he would look up and smile as if checking to make sure she had not disappeared. "First time flying first class?" Gabriel asked during a brief pause in his work, noting how Victoria continued to touch the leather armrest as if confirming its reality. "First time flying anywhere," Victoria admitted, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "I have never been outside of Washington State." Gabriel closed his laptop completely, giving her his full attention. Then this will be an adventure for both of us, he said. I have forgotten what it feels like to see places for the first time. The flight attendant appeared with warm towels and a menu that read like poetry, offering dishes Victoria had only seen in cooking shows. Gabriel ordered for both of them, choosing items he thought she might enjoy while explaining the origins of various ingredients with the casual knowledge of someone who had dined in restaurants around the world. Tell me about your art, Gabriel said as they waited for their meals to arrive. What do you paint? Victoria hesitated, unused to anyone showing genuine interest in her creative work. Mostly landscapes, she replied. Places I have never been, but dream about visiting. Beaches in Greece, mountains in Switzerland, gardens in Japan. You paint places you have never seen. I use photographs and imagination, Victoria explained. Sometimes I think the places we dream about are more real than the ones we actually visit, because we fill them with all our hopes and possibilities. Gabriel studied her face with an expression that made Victoria feel as though he were seeing something in her that she had not known existed. What if you could see those places in person? He asked quietly. What if you could paint them from life instead of dreams? The world of Sterling Innovations' New York City hit Victoria like a symphony played at maximum volume. The sounds, the lights, sheer energy of millions of people moving through the urban landscape with purpose and determination overwhelmed her senses in the most exhilarating way possible. Gabriel navigated the city with the ease of someone who considered it a second home, guiding her through crowded streets and into a sleek black car that transported them to his hotel. The Sterling Hotel was a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to reach toward the clouds with architectural ambition. Victoria's reflection looked small and uncertain in the polished marble floors of the lobby, but Gabriel's hand on her elbow provided steady reassurance as they moved toward the elevators. The company owns this property, Gabriel explained as they rose toward the upper floors. It made more sense than constantly booking rooms in different cities. Victoria's suite was larger than her entire Seattle apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Central Park. The furnishings were elegant without being ostentatious, and fresh flowers filled crystal vases throughout the space. A bottle of champagne waited on ice with a note that read, "Welcome to Sterling Innovations." Victoria, get some rest, Gabriel said, pausing in the doorway. Tomorrow, you will see what my world actually looks like when it is working. The high-stakes meeting. The Sterling Innovations offices occupied 3 floors of a Manhattan skyscraper, with modern design elements that emphasize both functionality and aesthetic beauty. Glass conference rooms overlooked the city, and the open workspace buzzed with the focused energy of people working on projects that would affect businesses around the globe. Gabriel transformed completely in his professional environment, becoming a conductor orchestrating complex business relationships with clients who spoke different languages and operated in different time zones. Victoria watched from a corner of his office, taking notes on his schedule and trying to understand the rhythm of his work. The Tokyo deal requires finalization by Friday. James Morrison, Gabriel's business partner, explained during their morning briefing. James was shorter than Gabriel, with graying hair and the kind of intense focus that suggested he had built his career on attention to detail. But the software integration is presenting unexpected challenges. Gabriel frowned, studying reports spread across his desk like pieces of a puzzle he was determined to solve. What kind of challenges? Cultural preferences in user interface design, James replied. Our American approach to navigation does not translate well to Japanese business practices. Victoria listened to their discussion, noting the frustration in both men's voices as they described technical problems that threatened to derail months of careful negotiation. During a pause in their conversation, she found herself speaking without entirely meaning to. Could you show the interface to someone who actually works in a Japanese company? She suggested quietly. Sometimes the people using the software know more about what they need than the people designing. Both men turned to look at her, and Victoria immediately felt self-conscious about offering opinions in a world she barely understood. But Gabriel's expression showed interest rather than dismissal. Do you know someone in Japan? He asked. Victoria shook her head, but continued with her thought. Not personally, but there are online communities for business professionals. You could post screenshots and ask for feedback about functionality and cultural appropriateness. James raised an eyebrows, clearly skeptical about seeking advice from strangers on the internet. But Gabriel was already reaching for his phone, his expression brightening with the kind of enthusiasm Victoria had seen when he made his crucial phone call at the cafe, the crisis and resolution. By Thursday afternoon, Victoria's suggestion had evolved into a comprehensive feedback process that involved business professionals from 3 different countries offering insights about user interface design. The Tokyo client had agreed to delay the deadline by 1 week to allow for modifications based on the international input. "This is brilliant," Gabriel said, reviewing the survey responses that had poured in from around the world. "We are getting perspectives we never would have considered from our internal team." Victoria felt a warm glow of pride spreading through her chest. She had contributed something meaningful to Gabriel's complex business world, proving that her perspective had value beyond serving coffee and taking phone messages. "You saved the Tokyo deal," James admitted during their Friday morning meeting, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine respect. "The client is impressed that we took such a collaborative approach to understanding their needs." Gabriel looked at Victoria with an expression that made her feel as though she had accomplished something far more significant than suggesting an online survey. "You see solutions where the rest of us see only problems," he said. "That is a rare gift." The growing connection that evening. Gabriel took Victoria to dinner at a restaurant that required reservations weeks in advance and served food that qualified as edible art. The ambiance was intimate without being romantic, allowing them to talk without the pressure of defining what was developing between them. "How do you do this constantly?" Victoria asked, gesturing toward the elegant surroundings. "Live in hotels, eat in restaurants, never have a place that feels like home." Gabriel considered her question while twirling pasta around his fork with practiced ease. "I suppose I stopped thinking about home as a place and started thinking about it as a feeling," he replied. "But I am beginning to wonder if I have been wrong about that." "What do you mean?" "This week, watching you discover New York, seeing your reaction to experiences that have become routine for me. I remember what it felt like when everything was new and exciting," Gabriel explained. "You make me see my own life differently." Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine they had been sharing. "You make me feel like I could be someone braver than I thought I was," she admitted. Gabriel reached across the table, covering her hand with his. The contact sent electricity up her arm and made her suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how the restaurant lighting made his green eyes appear almost luminous. "Victoria," he began, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Yes? I want you to know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with business," he said carefully. "You have brought something into my life that I did not even realize was missing." Victoria studied his face, noting the vulnerability in his expression and the way his usual confidence seemed tempered by something that looked like hope mixed with fear. "What happens next?" she asked. Gabriel smiled, but it was a different kind of smile than his usual expressions of amusement or professional satisfaction. This smile seemed to come from somewhere deeper, more personal. "Next, we go to Italy," he said, "and we find out what happens when we stop being careful about what we are feeling. The promise of tomorrow later that night." As Victoria stood at the window of her hotel suite, looking out over the lights of Manhattan, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 1 week. The city spread below her like a glittering tapestry of possibilities, and for the first time in her adult life, she felt as though she were part of something larger than her small, safe world. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Rosa back in Seattle. "How is the adventure going? Are you living in a movie yet?" Victoria typed back, "Better than a movie. This feels real." And it did feel real, more real than anything she had experienced before. Gabriel had not just offered her a job. He had offered her a completely different way of existing in the world. She was no longer just Victoria Hayes, the struggling artist who served coffee to pay rent. She was Victoria Hayes, international business consultant, and maybe, possibly, something more to a man who saw the world as his personal playground. As she prepared for sleep in sheets that probably cost more than her monthly salary, Victoria allowed herself to imagine what Italy might hold for them. Would Gabriel continue to reveal more of the man behind the business persona? Would she continue to discover parts of herself that had been hidden beneath years of playing it safe? Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, and new opportunities to explore whatever was growing between them. For tonight, it was enough to know that she had said yes to the impossible and discovered that the impossible had been waiting for her all along. The magic of Tuscany, the morning sun, painted the rolling hills of Tuscany in shades of gold and amber, creating a landscape that seemed designed by artists rather than nature. Victoria stood on the terrace of their villa, breathing in air that carried the scent of olive groves and wild herbs, while trying to convince herself that this was actually her life and not some elaborate dream. Gabriel emerged from the villa carrying 2 cups of espresso, his usual business attire replaced by casual linen pants and a white shirt that made his green eyes appear even more striking in the Italian sunlight. He had been different since they arrived in Florence 3 days earlier, more relaxed and present, as if the Renaissance city had awakened something in him that had been dormant for years. "The vineyard owner wants to meet with us this afternoon," Gabriel said, handing her the espresso. "But this morning is ours." Victoria accepted the coffee, savoring the rich flavor while admiring the view that stretched toward distant mountains. "I still cannot believe this is for business," she said. "It feels too beautiful to involve spreadsheets and contracts." Gabriel laughed, a sound that had become increasingly frequent during their Italian adventure. "Sterling Innovations is considering an investment in sustainable agriculture technology," he explained. "But you are right. This particular location makes it difficult to focus on profit margins." They had spent the previous day exploring Florence, where Gabriel had surprised Victoria by revealing an extensive knowledge of Renaissance art and architecture. He had guided her through the Uffizi Gallery with the passion of someone who genuinely appreciated beauty for its own sake, rather than as another item to be acquired or conquered. "Gabriel," Victoria said, setting down her espresso cup and turning to face him completely. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask me anything," he replied, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe he meant it. "What made you start your company? What drives you to work as hard as you do?" Gabriel was quiet for a moment, looking out over the Tuscan landscape as if searching for words among the cypress trees. "My father built his business empire by treating people like resources to be consumed," he said finally. "I wanted to prove that success could be achieved through collaboration rather than exploitation." The artistic awakening that afternoon. After their meeting with the vineyard owner had concluded successfully, Gabriel surprised Victoria by producing an easel and art supplies he had somehow acquired during their morning exploration of the local village. "I thought you might want to paint something real instead of imagined," he said, arranging the easel on the terrace where the light was perfect for capturing the golden afternoon glow over the valley. Victoria stared at the supplies as if they were precious artifacts. "When did you have time to buy these?" "While you were enchanted by the olive oil tasting," Gabriel admitted with a smile. "I may have conspired with the shop owner to create a distraction." The gesture touched Victoria more deeply than expensive dinners or luxury accommodations. Gabriel had noticed her passion and taken concrete steps to nurture it, something no one had ever done for her before. She picked up a brush, testing its weight and flexibility, feeling a familiar excitement building in her chest. "Will you sit for me?" she asked impulsively. "I want to paint you here in this light," Gabriel agreed, settling into a chair positioned to take advantage of the warm afternoon sun. As Victoria began to sketch, she found herself studying his face with new intensity, noting the way sunlight caught the angles of his cheekbones and the small lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than his serious reputation might indicate. "Tell me about your dreams," Victoria said as she worked, her brush moving in confident strokes across the canvas. "Not your business goals or financial targets. Your real dreams." Gabriel was quiet for so long that Victoria wondered if he had heard her question. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she had never heard before. "I dream about having someone to share all of this with," he said quietly. Someone who sees beauty in the world the way you do. Who reminds me why any of it matters. Victoria's brush paused mid-stroke as she looked up at him. The expression on his face was completely unguarded, showing a loneliness that all his wealth and success had been unable to remedy. "Gabriel," she began. But he continued speaking. "I dream about waking up in the same place 2 days in a row. About having conversations that are not about profit margins or market expansion," he said. "I dream about being with someone who chose me for who I am, not for what I can provide." The misunderstanding. The painting session was interrupted by Gabriel's phone ringing with urgent business from London. Victoria continued working while he paced the terrace, switching between languages as he addressed what sounded like a crisis requiring immediate attention. She tried not to listen to his conversation, but certain phrases caught her attention despite her efforts to focus on her art. "The Hayes project requires modification," Gabriel said at one point, and Victoria's hand froze on her brush. "Yes. The personal assistant arrangement has been more successful than anticipated." Victoria felt a cold sensation spreading through her chest as she processed Gabriel's words. Was she a project? Had their entire relationship been nothing more than a business experiment? She set down her brush and walked to the far edge of the terrace, trying to calm her racing thoughts and the sudden nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. Everything that had felt magical and real suddenly seemed calculated and false. Gabriel finished his call and approached her, but Victoria stepped away when he reached toward her. "What is wrong?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "The Hayes project," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is that what I am to you?" Gabriel's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something that looked like panic. "Victoria, you misunderstood what you heard?" Victoria felt tears building behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You talked about me like I was a business arrangement that exceeded your expectations? That is not what I meant," Gabriel said, his accent becoming more pronounced as it always did when he was emotional. "The Hayes project refers to a completely different matter. A technology development named after the lead engineer." Victoria wanted to believe him, but the doubt that had taken root in her mind was growing like a weed, feeding on every moment of their relationship that had seemed too good to be true. "How do I know what is real between us and what is just part of your business strategy?" The choice that evening, Victoria packed her belongings while Gabriel sat in the villa's living room, staring at the half-finished painting she had abandoned on the terrace. The portrait showed him relaxed and genuinely happy, captured in a moment of unguarded contentment that now felt like a lie. "You cannot leave like this," Gabriel said when Victoria appeared with her suitcase. "Not over a misunderstanding. It is not just the misunderstanding," Victoria replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "It is everything. The expensive gifts, the luxury travel, the job offer that changed my life overnight. Normal people do not live like this, Gabriel. Normal relationships do not develop this way." Gabriel stood slowly, and Victoria could see the careful control he was exercising over his emotions. "What if I do not want a normal relationship?" he said. "What if I want something extraordinary, with someone who sees the world differently than everyone else in my life? What happens when the extraordinary becomes ordinary?" Victoria asked. "What happens when I am no longer new and interesting? When helping you remember your humanity becomes just another job?" Gabriel walked to the terrace doors, looking out at the Tuscan sunset that painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. "Look at that painting you started today," he said without turning around. "Do you see someone who is performing a role for business purposes?" Despite herself, Victoria glanced at the canvas. The man she had captured in oils looked genuinely peaceful, completely present in the moment, without any trace of the driven businessman who conquered international markets. It was Gabriel, as she had come to know him. It's vulnerable and real and human. "I see someone I thought I knew," Victoria said softly. Gabriel turned to face her, and Victoria was surprised to see tears in his eyes. "You do know me," he said. "You know me better than anyone has in years. You know the man I am when I am not trying to prove anything to the world." The resolution, Victoria set down her suitcase and walked to the painting, studying the face she had captured with such care. The afternoon light had revealed things about Gabriel that she had sensed but never articulated. a depth of feeling that had nothing to do with business strategies or calculated moves. "The phone call," Gabriel said quietly, joining her in front of the easel. "The Hayes Project is a renewable energy initiative we are developing with a team in Scotland. The lead engineer is Robert Hayes, no relation to you. When I mentioned the personal assistant arrangement, I was talking to James about extending your contract because working with you has been the best part of my business travels in years." Victoria felt the knot of doubt in her chest beginning to loosen. "Why did you not just explain that immediately?" "Because you looked so hurt, so ready to believe that everything between us was false," Gabriel replied. "I realize that I have never given you any reason to trust that my feelings are genuine. Because I have been afraid to make myself vulnerable." Gabriel moved closer. Close enough that Victoria could see the gold flecks in his green eyes and smell the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with the lavender-scented air of the Tuscan. "Evening, Victoria Hayes," he said, his voice carrying all the formality of a business presentation and all the tenderness of a prayer. "I am in love with you. Not with the idea of you, not with what you represent, but with you. The woman who lent a stranger her phone, who sees solutions where others see problems, who paints dreams and makes them real." Victoria felt her breath catch in her throat. "Gabriel, I know this has happened quickly," he continued. "I know it seems impossible that two people from such different worlds could build something lasting together. But I also know that since the moment you walked into my life, everything has felt more real, more meaningful, more worth fighting for." Victoria studied his face, searching for any sign of the polished businessman who had first walked into Moonbeam Cafe. Instead, she saw only Gabriel, the man who had shown her the world and somehow convinced her that she belonged in it. "What are you asking me?" she said quietly. "I am asking you to take the biggest risk of your life," Gabriel replied. "I am asking you to believe that what we have is worth more than the fear of getting hurt, worth more than playing it safe." The new beginning Victoria looked once more at the painting, at the man she had captured in a moment of perfect honesty. She thought about her small apartment in Seattle, her job at the coffee shop, the safe and predictable life she had been living before. Gabriel Sterling burst through the door looking for a phone. Then she thought about waking up in different cities, seeing sunsets over Tuscan hills, contributing to business decisions that affected people around the world, and most importantly, being seen and valued for exactly who she was by someone who had every reason to choose safer, more conventional companions. "I am terrified," Victoria admitted. "So am I," Gabriel replied. "But I would rather be terrified with you than safe without you." Victoria set down her suitcase and stepped into Gabriel's arms, feeling his hands settle at her waist as if they belonged there. "What happens now?" she asked. Gabriel smiled, the expression transforming his entire face with joy and relief. "Now we finish your painting," he said, "and then we figure out how to build a life together that makes room for both your dreams and mine." As the last light of the Tuscan sunset faded into purple twilight, Victoria and Gabriel stood together on the terrace, looking out over a landscape that seemed to promise infinite possibilities. She had left Seattle as a woman afraid to risk anything important. She was returning as someone brave enough to believe in love that defied logic and dreams that seemed too big for Ordi.